Welcome to the show, Brain Health, Unchaining Your Pain. And I am really excited and very honoured to have a very special guest on the show today, which is Mike McCarthy. Mike, welcome.
Thank you.
Now, for those that don't know Mike, he's a former journalist and presenter who worked on screen for the BBC and Sky News. He's covered wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. He is an award-winning journalist. He's interviewed people from Muhammad Ali to several prime ministers in the past. And his son Ross, unfortunately, died by suicide in February 2021, and he now campaigns for better mental health. Mike, I just thank you so much. I know it's not such a long time ago since your son passed, but really, could you tell me? I know that you're passionate about mental health now. Just tell me what you're really focused on based on your experiences that you've had since February 21.
Well, Ross left a long farewell note to his family. He addressed each one of us in turn, but he also asked all of us to campaign for better mental health provision. In his words, he said, "It's just not there." And those words are very clearly important to me now, and tend to direct a lot of what I'm doing. I wasn't involved in campaigning before we lost Ross in February this year, and it's only since he took his own life that I've got involved. He'd struggled with severe depression for more than 10 years, and after that he asked for therapy and he was put on a 6-month waiting list.
Wow.
I sort of made it my business to try and educate myself about mental health, particularly at the crisis end. And I've spoken to, hundreds of people now: mums, dads, brothers, sisters, psychiatrists, mental health nurses, charities, you name it. And one of the things that particularly shocked me was to find out that suicide is the main killer of young men under 45 in this country. And it prompted me to ask myself, if that's the case, then why aren't we talking about it? Where's the political discourse? Where's the debate?
Where's the action?
Where's the action? Where's the conversation? Exactly. And again, following that, why is it like this? Why are we so silent about this huge issue that takes so many people? And obviously it's a tragedy, whether it's a young man, old man, young woman, old woman, whatever. But I think the fact that 3/4 of those who take their lives are men, again, raises many questions that I'm interested, as a journalist and as a bereaved dad, to seek answers to.
And I think, we got connected on LinkedIn, and your story really struck a chord with me, because I'm the next generation or the second down the line of a dad who had death by suicide in their early 40s. That was my mother's father, and he was called Francis Barnes. And at that time, it was not a nice thing to experience for anybody, and it isn't today. But obviously at the time it was considered a crime as well, and very much something that you didn't talk about. And what I find really shocking is we're still almost in a very similar situation today, that we really aren't talking about it enough. No longer is it a crime, no longer is it something to be ashamed of, to bury under the carpet, but those conversations around the feelings that we have that lead up to suicide, the triggers that cause us to have suicide, which often trauma related, as you get the build up. You mentioned that your son had 10 years of depression. This wasn't something that just happened overnight, there was a long lead for him. And I know you mentioned it in another interview, he's, could be considered as terminally ill, yet it was very slow in the action that was taken by the system to give him the right support at the right time, to help him heal from the struggles that we was having. And for me, what I find really difficult when we talk about mental health is that we sometimes think that time is a healer, and time does not heal. It's the same situation as if we break a leg, the time to go and get your leg fixed is the time that you break it. And you want somebody to look at it and to image it and to understand where the break is. But in the space of mental health, we just don't do that. We often, in some instances and in many instances, because of the way the system works, it's like going to a specialist, or not even a specialist, and saying, "Oh, I'm sorry that your leg's hurting. Here's 2 paracetamol. Take these until the pain goes away," and that's not good enough.
No, I think you've touched on a number of almost inexplicable issues there. First of all, can I say sorry for your loss and your family experience in relation to suicide? What you say about it once having been a crime, I can scarcely believe that in my lifetime, people who had attempted suicide and survived could then and were very often put in prison.
Punished.
Now, the illegal status was lifted in 1961, and here we are, all of these years later, still using the language of the Dark Ages. We still refer to it as committed suicide in the same way that we talk about people committing murder or rape. And I think this is one of the things that is a hangover from those days. And I think because of the stigma, we've not really moved forward in some ways. In many ways we have. And the conversation is becoming more open. The generations that come along, I think, are taking it forward step by step. But I think if we're still using that phrase, committed suicide, that in itself shows how far we've got to go. Moving on to your point about, what provision there is for someone who's in crisis, again, to repeat, Ross struggled for 10 years. He tried everything. Ross was a fighter. Ross was a real warrior. He didn't like to take time off work. He was very good at pretending for the sake of his family and his friends. He was selfless. He thought that therapy might be his salvation. And to be told, as you say, I regard it as cancer of the mind. Ross had attempted to take his own life last year too. So he was in the very highest of the high risk categories. And yet, if someone goes through the doors of a hospital with terminal cancer, nobody says, bye-bye, see you in 6 months' time.
Have a few painkillers, we'll see you later.
Exactly. And I have to accept that nobody knew that it was terminal. I certainly didn't appreciate how bad things had become with Ross. But I think someone who has attempted to take their own lives before, who's got a long history of severe depression, has tried virtually every medication, then that should send red flags waving all over the place. I don't think those red flags were being waved necessarily, or certainly if they were, that they weren't really noticed in the way that they should have been. And unfortunately, I now try to speak not just about my son and the pain that that his loss has left us, his family, with, but all of the thousands of people who find themselves in the same space day in, day out. It's an unspoken, largely a silent, hidden pandemic.
And I think the situation that your son found him in is not unusual. The fact that he was stuck on a waiting list. And I just love to bring my own personal experience through the COVID situation, where my mum lost her husband, my dad, in September 2019, and very shortly afterwards we went into lockdown, and shortly, okay, it was 6 months, but that's not very long in the terms of grieving for somebody whose death you unfortunately had to witness. And she went into a very deep depression, and it was in June sort of time 2021, this year, that she said, I don't think I can go on anymore. I don't think I can go on. And that was obviously for me an immediate red flag. And she didn't want to phone the doctor to get help. And I think this is a really key point, that when you're in a very dark place, it's sometimes really hard to admit that you need the help, or even have the energy to get the help. And when we did get the help, we were thankful that the immediate solution, as is typical, she was put on antidepressants, and offered cognitive behavioural therapy, but the online version to avoid the waiting that she would have endured. And actually, her experience was the initial interview experience that she had to be enrolled into the therapy. And I've asked her permission for this before we came on the call, is she found it so offensive, and so invasive in terms of her having to recite exactly what happened, that she said she wanted to commit suicide after the conversation, because of the way that the lack of compassion and care that was given to her on the initial telephone call, which was by somebody who was may have been from a call centre, but didn't seem to appreciate the state of mind that she was in. And fortunately for me, being a brain health coach, I was able to help her along, and I lived close to her, and she was part of my bubble, so that obviously really helped. But there are many people that don't have that support, and she ended up, the antidepressants made her feel worse, so she came off the antidepressants within a month, and I pulled together an appropriate brain health recovery protocol that was suited her. We looked at her lifestyle, how she could improve that. We did some therapy that I've been trained in, which helped her relieve the trauma that she had been in. And we put her on saffron, which is a well-known alternative to antidepressants, which doesn't have the side effects, yet does support mood enhancement. So, and it's a very natural product that many of us, you can buy off the shelf and buy as a herb in the supermarket. So I think it's just such a shame that we leave these people who are so vulnerable to like you say, a 6-month waiting list, and there's nothing to fill the void in between to help them get the recovery that they really need, that is available to them.
I think mental health crisis care is in itself in crisis. I think it's broken, and you will know only too well the countless hundreds of people who have similar experiences. I've lost count. I lost count, many months ago, of the number of people who told me that their loved ones had been in what they describe as a revolving door situation. That phrase keeps coming out every time, it seems, that I speak to a bereaved mum, dad, brother, sister, whatever, that they feel that their loved ones were stuck in this revolving door syndrome. And just, I'll tell you about Ross's fiance, Charlotte, who found Ross in the middle of the night. And
Wow.
she asked for therapy herself. and was told, we'll put you on a 6-month waiting list. And it was sort of dark irony upon dark irony, tragedy upon tragedy. And again, we were fortunate because I put a post to this effect on LinkedIn. I was so frustrated,
Yeah.
And scared that history might repeat itself. And thank you to the kindness of so many people out there, and to the effectiveness of LinkedIn, that Charlotte was offered so much help by so many people. But not everybody is in that fortunate situation.
No.
A lot of people can't afford private treatment. And what happens to these people? I really dread to think. And yeah, I think the time has come to shout this from the rooftops. I'm not ashamed of my son. In fact, I'm proud of him, not what he did, but I'm proud of the person that he was. And I'm not going to stay in some dark little corner and keep quiet. I won't allow it to be swept under the carpet, as suicide so often is for various reasons. And I sense that I'm not alone in feeling like this. Again, the people that I've spoken to, it seems to be a common thing now for people bereaved by suicide to want to speak out about it for various reasons. Again, to help get rid of the stigma, but also to, because it is a major issue. It's there. We can't ignore it. Again, so many families are touched by this. If it's not affected a direct member of the family in terms of suicide or attempted suicide, many, perhaps most families have some idea, some experience of either themselves or a loved one going through severe depression. And yet we just have not, as a society, got to grips with this. And it's not just about the individual pain of individual families. It is about society, because the loss is tremendous. Ross was a good man. He was dedicated to his family. He was loving. He was kind. He was sporty. He was active. He was hardworking. And
He was about to get married as well, wasn't
he was
he?
about to get married and couldn't because of COVID.
Yeah.
He couldn't play tennis, which he liked to do. He was in a tennis club. He couldn't play tennis because of COVID. He couldn't play football because of COVID. He couldn't take his son, his 3-year-old son, Charlie, swimming because of COVID. And in his farewell letter, he did refer to this. And one of the lines was, I guess this is what happens when you lock someone up for so long. He felt on top of his severe depression that it was, we'll never know for sure. And I guess this is an assumption on my part, although it's clear from the letter that COVID and COVID restrictions played a big part on how he was feeling. He'd had COVID several weeks before he took his own life. And yeah, it obviously made a huge impression on him, made a huge impression on his outlook, and it was important to him, being the kind of person that he was.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that, because I think it's important that people realise that, when you're in from a brain health perspective, when you have a brain that is in a space where it's in a depressive state, which is in essence the deep limbic system part of the brain is overactive, people often use exercise and sport as a mechanism to calm their brain down, and to calm that overactivity down in that part of the region of their brain. And it's vital for those people that they have that outlet to generate the serotonin that's really important, the dopamine, that depending on the brain condition that they're struggling with, to help them manage their brain effectively. And obviously for your son, it's quite possible, although we will never know, that the lack of exercise and activity had a huge impact on his state of brain health and brain function, because he wasn't able to give it the neurotransmitters that it needed to help him function effectively and with less depressive symptoms.
Yeah, and who knows, maybe the COVID itself had a bearing as well. I'm no scientist, but I read that it's possible that people with an underlying condition, such as severe depression, that might have been exacerbated by the illness itself.
Absolutely, and the science from COVID in the brain is emerging, but it's certainly known that symptoms that people have pre-COVID can be worsened, particularly if you have if it's related to blood flow in the brain. And I know because COVID restricts blood flow, and blood flow is one of an important brain imaging factor in functional brain imaging, such as SPECT. And we know that people who have had COVID have noticed symptoms worsening, and we've also seen new symptoms come to bear for people that have experienced long COVID who haven't had those conditions previously. So I think it's really important that we consider how we can help people who do have pre-existing conditions help themselves optimize their brain health as best they can during periods where we're in a lockdown situation, as your son was at the time, to make sure that they can elevate their mood naturally, such as vitamin D supplementation and making sure that's optimized, omega-3 supplementation, making sure your omega-3 levels are optimized. Many people have insufficient levels of vitamin D and omega-3, both of which improve mood, both of which reduce inflammation, and inflammation is one of the causes, is a cause or an outcome of catching COVID. And there's certain aspects within the brain that we see localized inflammation within the brain, and changes in the brain cells, and the neural networks within the brain can break down. And if you think about the male brains compared to the female brains, they're not the same. So the male brains have more neurons, they have more brain cells. The female brains have more connections. So one of the theories with regards to the reasons why men are 4 times more likely to have death by suicide compared to women is because their brains are wired very differently. They have larger amygdalas than women, and also that they have less connections. So once they make a decision, and then their decisions are more localized, not globally done in a brain context as women do, they go for that decision. So there's not a debate about is that the right or wrong decision. It's that's the decision I want to make, and then they go for it. And I don't think there's enough recognition about how we address the treatment and uncovering the root cause in the context of the brain health. And I know you mentioned your son did football, which is if he suffered multiple minor knocks to his brain, which football is known to cause, that leads to depression. That can lead to depression. It's an increased risk factor for depression. And so if we don't take into account all of the, individually, it might not seem as much, but collectively, it can really change the state of the brain. We need to be much more specific and much more personalized from a treatment and a diagnostic approach than having the generic approach that we have today, because the way the system works is time is constrained. They don't take the time to delve into the history, and so they go with the simplest solution, which is putting a band-aid over a gaping wound, often through the use of drugs, rather than uncovering and addressing the root cause of someone's of brain struggle in the situation of your son?
A lot of that's sort of really interesting and really informative, and certainly from my perspective, as I say, as a non-scientist, quite revelatory. Um, I think there's a couple of things as well that I'd like to add, if I may, that I think there are all kinds of cultural reasons as well why men in particular don't share how they feel, what their emotions are, and this is something that I'm trying to do something practical about, as well as campaigning for better mental health provision. I've set up it's a branch of a national charity called Talk Club. I've set one up in my home city in Yorkshire. It's the first branch of Talk Club in Yorkshire, and I think it's the first one in the north of England. And this is basically, it's as almost as simple as it sounds. It's a group of men getting together in a safe, non-judgmental, confidential environment where they can and they're positively encouraged, if they want to talk about their feelings and emotions. So that's one thing that I'm also sort of quite keen to just do my little bit, if I can, to just change the dial a little on the sort of cultural aspects of men talking and listening to each other. I think we're in about week 11 or week 12 now, and we're seeing some sort of real progress, and that heartens me, despite the grief that we're going through as a family. It does sort of hearten me and lift my spirits to see for myself just how things like that can work. But I think I try not to get too carried away with things like this, because I think at a national level we need to fix this desperately broken service. And I think also the research and the conversation around COVID, fascinating though it is, I think that the figures don't seem to be moving particularly, in one direction or another. Sometimes the suicide statistics go up, sometimes they go down. But what it seems to me that in recent decades, it hasn't changed substantially.
No, there's no step change like you would expect. With it, when we have positive medical intervention that really works, we see step changes, and that is not happening. Despite the multiple charities that we have, despite the multiple statements that are being made about investment this and investment that, the fact is it is the Cinderella in terms of investment within the system. And not enough is invested in that part of the healthcare. And what I think is really tragic about this is that what they're not seeing is, unfortunately your son had death by suicide, but mental health in its own right is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's disease is predicted to be a huge cost to the NHS in the future. We're seeing a 30% increase in people getting Alzheimer's disease. 1 in 2 people are going to get it over the age of 85. Why is that important? Because mental health is a risk factor. And if we don't address the issues that people are having with mental health and look at the upstream issues that are causing them to get into a position where they are experiencing mental health struggles, then we are not going to address the downstream issues that are going to naturally happen, which is going to be an even greater crisis, on the system that is already broken.
I completely agree. And again, on the charities, there are some fantastic charities out there, large and small, doing excellent work. But another thing that I've found is that it's a very fragmented system. The charities, as far as I can tell, don't seem to be speaking to power with one voice. They are all fragmented voices, and I think there's a huge need for sort of unity there, for all of these charities to come together, drop any sense of vanity, because I think there is an element of vanity, certainly as far as some charities are concerned. And I think everyone needs to sort of come together to speak to government. It's very rude of me, but I often say that you don't speak to politicians, you scream at them. And I went to speak to the new suicide prevention minister, Gillian Keegan, a few weeks ago.
I saw your interview on the BBC, I think it was, or was it?
No, I think there was one on GB News, and I've talked on various channels. It's one thing that I've been paid to do all my life is to talk. So that's may not know much, but I can talk a lot. I asked her at the beginning, can we not get bogged down in a conversation about spending or statistics? Because whatever it is we're doing, we're not making any real headway. There may be some improvement here, there may be some decline there, but those statistics, somebody said to me not long after we lost Ross, I was involved in an interview, and I said, the figures speak for themselves. And he rightly corrected me and said, no, the figures don't speak for themselves, because if the figures spoke for themselves, they wouldn't be constantly high as they are. If the figures spoke for themselves, those figures would start coming down.
And I think what I always find surprising is they're looking at the, is it up or down? But the reality is, it's not the little we want to see a big shift.
Sure.
And we're not seeing that at all, like you say.
No, I hope we don't get bogged down too much by COVID, important though that is, and we've spoken about it, and I think there's far more research needed there. And as you say, we've got to sort of look upstream to sort of find out what's creating these kind of numbers. But God willing, COVID will be perhaps, if not a distant memory in a few years' time, more of a distant memory than it is now. Suicide, I suspect, will not be changed too much. I suspect the figures will not have changed too much. They might go up, they might go down, but basically I don't think they're going to move very far from where they are at the moment. And government MPs, ministers have to ask themselves, why isn't this happening? What is it that we're not doing? What do we have to change to put this right?
And I think that's so important, because until we look at the system and break away from like the whole system, I'm not talking about the NHS, the whole system, including the charities, including private healthcare, including people like myself who offer brain health coaching, the whole system that's there that can support people in getting out of a very dark place. And I've been in that dark place. I had suicidal thoughts myself back in 2016 after I got told by the firm I was working for I had no emotional intelligence shortly after having a miscarriage. I was fortunate enough to be able to get the coaching, and like you say, have the financial capital to do that. But the therapy I was offered at my doctor didn't even, he said I was stressed. I was signed off of work with stress, but I was too ashamed, and I didn't want to, because I'm in the military as well as a reservist. I didn't want to talk about the fact that I had suicidal thoughts because of the knock-on effect it would have had to my career, and already the shame that had been placed on me by the organisation that I was working in. It was just another layer to what was already a very multi-dimensional system for me, in terms of the trauma that I'd been through, of losing a baby, and all of the associate chronic stress that I was suffering with the firm at the time. So I think it's really important that, this isn't just about the NHS. This is about looking at the system that can help people, and the system that is affecting people like your son Ross, and causing his brain to change in ways that he's not able to manage it himself, or he hasn't been given the right tools or the right education to help him manage himself, and he becomes dependent and powerless to a system, because those tools and techniques aren't made available to him in a timely manner, to help him climb out of the deep hole that he was in.
Yeah, I know that there are hundreds upon hundreds, thousands of dedicated, hard-working, professional people working in mental health services. But I think that this is, it's a root and branch thing. I think it's the NHS. I think it's politics and the government. I think it's media. Where is the coverage of this particular subject? I think it's education. I think it goes right to infants, aged children. It goes right through all of these sort of interwoven layers of society. And as I say, it's not just an individual family or partner or whatever. It's not just their issue. I think, to be honest, I draw a parallel with child abuse. I think 20 years ago, child abuse was in a dark, murky corner, and children were told, don't say anything, sweep it under the carpet, forget it. That's the advice that was given to children. Then a spotlight was shone upon it, largely, I would say, by the media. And now the conversation around it is much healthier. And, children have places to go. They have people that they can speak to. There's a structure there. I think suicide is still lurking in that dark little corner, and like child abuse, we have to bring it out. And my favorite phrase is, sunlight is the best anesthetic. And I think we need to sort of shine some light on it.
And I think you're right. I want to go back to your terminology of a terminal illness, because suicide was the end state for your son Ross, sadly, but he had 10 years of trauma, of dealing with depression, that wasn't being resolved for him in a way that was helping him get better. And you for me personally, there's many different root causes of depression, one of which can be catching Lyme's disease. If you don't treat Lyme's disease, if you've been a victim of Lyme's disease, which comes from deer ticks and things like that, Lyme's disease can trigger depression, but it's resolved and treated with antibiotics, not antidepressants. Antidepressants won't remove the root cause. So there's so many different root causes of depression that I think we need to spend, unfortunately the outcome was suicide for your son, but I think we need to be looking much further upstream so that we don't have these figures, 10 years on, and we're focusing on creating the right intervention for people like your son Ross, that is going to help them calm that region of their brain down. And you mentioned that he'd been through multiple different types of antidepressants. Well, for me, that ought to have been ringing alarm bells in the medical space, that something else needed to be explored if the medication was not working for him in a way that was serving him over the long term. And they're not supposed to be used as a long-term aid. They're a band-aid in the near term, and actually long term, drugs can rewire your brain in a way that you become dependent on them, much like you may become dependent on illegal drugs. So it's really important that we don't just look at the band-aid solution or the drugs as are not the answer. We need to educate, like you said, and we need to equip people with the right tools early in that process, early in that cycle, to allow them to get the right help at the right time, so we don't have a repeat that Ross unfortunately had to go through, and now yourselves have gone through as well.
Sure, I'm not opposed to antidepressants. I think for some people they work exceptionally well, but I think too often they're used as a fig leaf for a lack of funding or for a lack of availability of a GP. I think, as you say, it's a sticking plaster. And again, I think it's the system, the individuals within that system, the members of the medical profession are under huge pressure. But I think that we've got to accept that people like Ross cannot be told to just go and come back in 6 months' time. We have to understand the urgency for people like that. Ross was, because he didn't want to take time off work, and maybe that was part of the problem. I think he found it difficult to tell people at work that he was suffering from severe depression, and that it kept coming back all of the time. And sometimes, because he was working away, he couldn't get to the GP, and he was just summarily discharged, and then had to sort of, there was a little bit, it was almost punitive. And he was treated as someone who was taking advantage of the system. But as you've said yourself, anybody who's been depressed, or particularly severely depressed, will know that just sometimes picking up the phone to the GP is an effort in itself. Never mind getting along to the GP, never mind getting along to the GP when there are pressures from work, when you're working away and you physically can't get to your GP. I think it's the cruelty and coldness of the system that so lets these people down.
Do you know, I 100% agree with you on that. From my mum's experience. Now, my mum was a nurse. She was a very successful nurse. She became a sister. She used to work in A&E many years ago. She's 78 now. So that was a very long time ago. And what she noticed from her experience was a total lack of care and compassion from her situation.
I really hope you enjoyed that conversation. Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to like and share this episode, and leave a review on my website or on Apple Podcasts. If you're looking for opportunities to optimize your brain health or unchain your pain from a past trauma, make sure you visit my website www.ruthmaryallen.com and use the code podcast10 at checkout to get 10% off all programs. And always remember, you are not stuck with the brain you have. You have the power to make it better. You have the power to unchain your pain and optimize your brain power and performance, so that you can win back energy and time doing what you love.
Each episode of Brain Health Unchaining Your Pain with Dr. Ruth Allan is for educational and demonstration purposes only. The information shared in each episode should not be interpreted as medical advice. This episode should not be used to self-diagnose or self-treat any health, medical or physical condition. Do not use this episode to avoid going to your healthcare professional or to replace the advice they give you. Consult with a trusted healthcare professional before doing anything contained in this episode. If you have any questions or concerns, please contact www.ruthmaryallen.com/connect.